My wife's affair exposed. The confrontation that changed everything. It all started when I found a strange message on my wife's phone. We had been married for 7 years, and while there were the usual ups and downs, I never suspected her of being unfaithful. But that message, just a simple, "Can't wait to see you tonight," changed everything. The sender was a man I didn't recognize. I tried to ignore the growing suspicion in my mind, telling myself I was just overthinking things. But the more I tried to push it out of my head, the more I kept noticing little things. Her long hours at work, her constant need to run errands on weekends, and her dismissive attitude when I brought up my concerns. I decided to confront her. One evening, after she returned from another work meeting, I sat her down. "I found a message on your phone," I said. She froze, her face going pale. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. At first, she denied it, claiming it was nothing and that I was just being paranoid. But when I pressed further, her defenses began to crumble. She admitted it. She had been seeing someone else for the past 6 months, a colleague from her office. They had an emotional connection that soon turned physical. My heart shattered, not only because of the betrayal, but because of how easily she had lied to my face for so long. The confrontation spiraled into chaos. She tried to justify her actions, telling me that she felt emotionally neglected and that I didn't understand her needs anymore. I was blindsided by her words. It wasn't just the affair. It was a complete lack of remorse, the way she seemed to place the blame on me instead of owning up to her own actions. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stand to be in the same house as her after everything. The next few weeks were a blur of anger, tears, and soul-searching. I leaned on my friends, some of whom knew about the affair even before I did. I began to question everything: our marriage, our life together, the trust one had placed in her. But through it all, there was one clear truth. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Eventually, we sat down again, this time with a therapist, and we discussed the fallout. She wanted to work things out, but I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. The affair had changed everything. It wasn't just about the other man. It was about the lies, the deceit, and the emotional distance between us that had grown over the years. As painful as it was, the confrontation forced me to take a hard look at our relationship and realize that I deserved more. More than betrayal, more than dishonesty, more than feeling like I wasn't enough. In the end, we separated, and while the healing process took time, I learned that confronting the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step to reclaiming my life. The separation was harder than I expected. I had thought that once I confronted the truth, everything would somehow become clear, that the anger and sadness would fade away quickly. But it didn't work like that. There were moments of deep loneliness when I wondered if I had made the right decision. I missed the woman I thought I knew, the one I had built a life with. There were still echoes of the life we had shared, from the quiet mornings we spent together to the plans we had made for the future. It was hard to let go of the version of her I had loved, but as the weeks turned into months, I began to understand more clearly what had happened. I started talking to friends and family more, getting their perspectives. Some of them, like I mentioned before, had known about the affair before I did. They hadn't wanted to tell me, not wanting to see me hurt. Others had been shocked, like me, when they found out. In therapy, I learned that my wife and I had grown apart in ways I hadn't even realized. The emotional neglect she mentioned in our sessions was something I had been too busy or blind to notice. We had stopped communicating on a deeper level. I had always been focused on work, and she had thrown herself into other aspects of her life, seeking attention and validation where I hadn't been able to give it to her. I also learned something else: the importance of boundaries. I had allowed things to slide for too long, thinking that love alone would be enough to hold everything together. But love doesn't work that way. It requires effort, communication, and respect. When all of that starts to break down, things like betrayal happen, and they are a direct result of neglecting the foundation of a relationship. Over time, I started to regain my sense of self. I threw myself into hobbies I had long abandoned, reconnected with old friends, and began taking better care of my physical and emotional health. I even started dating again, though I was hesitant. Trust didn't come easily, and I had to learn how to open up to someone new. But I wasn't the same person I was before the affair, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to fully trust anyone in the same way again. As for my wife, we tried to maintain some form of contact, especially when it came to the practical matters of dividing our belongings and deciding how to handle our finances. But there was always this thick wall of resentment between us. I didn't want to stay angry forever, but I wasn't sure how to move past the hurt. One day, she reached out, asking if we could meet up. She seemed different, more vulnerable, more open. She apologized again for what she had done, and this time, it felt like she really meant it. But as much as I appreciated her apology, I knew that I had to let go of the past in order to move forward, with or without her. I spent a lot of time thinking about forgiveness, not because I necessarily owed it to her, but because I owed it to myself. Holding on to that anger was only hurting me in the long run. Slowly, I let go of the rage. I didn't forgive her right away, and maybe I never truly will, but I found a place of acceptance. I accepted that she made a terrible choice, and that I had a choice too, a choice to rebuild my life on my own terms. Ultimately, we never got back together. We parted ways, both emotionally scarred but wiser in our own ways. I found peace in knowing that I had learned important lessons from the affair about myself, about what I needed in a relationship, and about the importance of being honest with each other. The betrayal had changed everything, but in the end, it helped me change for the better. As time passed, I began to see the affair as a painful but necessary turning point in my life. I had to go through the heartache to realize that I was capable of rebuilding myself, even if it meant starting from scratch. For a while, I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again, but slowly, I began to understand that trust is something that's earned, not something that should be freely given to anyone who asks. I found a new sense of independence. It was strange at first, navigating life without the person I had expected to grow old with. There were moments when I felt like I was missing a part of myself, but those moments passed. I found new friends who supported me in ways I didn't even know I needed. I started to travel, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because of the life I had built with my wife. I also began to focus on my career in a way I hadn't before. I took on new projects, sought out challenges I would have shied away from in the past. It felt empowering to put my energy into something that was entirely my own. I had stopped defining myself through the lens of my marriage, and it was liberating. A year after the affair had come to light, I met someone new. I was cautious at first, unsure of whether I was ready to open up again. She was different, patient, kind, and most importantly, respectful of my boundaries. I took things slowly, unsure if I could ever truly give my heart away again. But as time went on, I realized that while I may never forget what happened in my past relationship, it didn't have to dictate my future. The scars from the affair were still there, but they weren't as raw as they once were. I had healed in ways I hadn't expected. I had learned to trust again, not just others, but myself. I had learned that it's okay to walk away from a relationship that isn't serving you, even if it means facing the unknown. My wife and I, after all the emotional turmoil, had reached a place of mutual understanding. We occasionally checked in with each other, no longer with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of resigned peace. We both acknowledged that we had changed in ways that could never be undone, and that we were both responsible for the breakdown of our marriage. I forgave her, not for her, but for myself. Holding on to the anger had only kept me stuck in the past. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, and it wasn't the way I thought things would go. But I had made it through. I had learned that sometimes the hardest experiences open the door to the greatest personal growth. It took time, therapy, and a lot of self-reflection, but I was finally in a place where I felt whole again. The confrontation that had once seemed like the end of everything turned out to be the beginning of something new, the beginning of finding out who I really was and what I truly wanted. It had been the most painful chapter of my life, but looking back, I could see that it had been the catalyst for the changes that had shaped me into a stronger, wiser version of myself. In the end, the affair had exposed more than just a betrayal. It had exposed the truths about my own life, my own needs, and my own strength. And while I would never forget the pain of it all, I had finally learned how to let go and move forward. As months turned into years, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had evolved since that painful confrontation. The person I was when I first discovered the affair felt like a distant memory, almost like a stranger I had once known. The hurt had faded into something more manageable, and in its place, there was a quiet sense of resilience and acceptance. I had gone from being a man shattered by betrayal to someone who could look back without bitterness or regret. The relationship I had with my ex-wife was no longer defined by animosity, but by mutual respect. We had both moved on in our own ways, and while we didn't keep in touch often, there was an understanding between us that we had both grown. Our conversations, though few, were civil, and there was no more anger between us. It was strange, but freeing to no longer feel the weight of resentment hanging over me. The new relationship I had entered into was still a slow burn, but it felt different. It wasn't about rushing or filling the void left by my marriage. It was about finding someone who could truly meet me where I was, who valued the lessons I had learned and respected the space I needed to heal. She was patient and kind, but most importantly, she understood that I had a past, one that had shaped who I was today. She never tried to push me into things I wasn't ready for, and I truly appreciated that. There were moments when the scars from my marriage resurfaced, like when I had trouble fully trusting or when certain situations triggered old memories. But I had learned how to manage them. I talked openly about my fears and hesitations, something I had never done in my previous marriage. The transparency felt liberating, and it helped build a foundation of honesty that was missing before. In my personal life, I found a new passion for travel. I had always wanted to see the world beyond the confines of my old routine, and now, with no ties holding me back, I did just that. I went on solo trips, visited new places, and connected with people from different walks of life. I discovered a side of myself I hadn't known existed, the side that was free to explore, to take risks, and to create new memories without the weight of the past always looming over me. I also became more involved in my community, something I hadn't really considered before. I volunteered at local shelters, worked with youth mentoring programs, and even took on projects that helped people in need. It gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment, a way to channel my experiences into something meaningful. There were moments, though, when I wondered what my ex-wife's life was like now. I wasn't jealous or angry, just curious. I had heard through mutual friends that she had tried to move on, that she was in another relationship, and that she was trying to make things right for herself. I didn't want to know the details, but I hoped she had learned and grown from the mistakes she had made. I couldn't say I wanted her back, but I did want her to find peace. One night, a few years after the affair, I ran into her at a mutual friend's gathering. The sight of her brought back memories, both good and bad. We exchanged pleasantries, and there was an ease in our conversation that had been absent during the painful months following our split. There was no lingering animosity, just two people who had once shared a life together and who had learned to let go. We talked briefly about the past, but we didn't dwell on it. It felt like the final step in closing that chapter, knowing that both of us had truly moved on. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. The pain that once felt insurmountable had eventually become a part of my story, something that I no longer let define me. I had faced the darkest part of my life and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more aware of the value of self-love. The affair had exposed many things, some painful, some enlightening, but it had ultimately forced me to confront the truth of who I was and what I needed from life and from relationships. Looking back, I could see the journey for what it was, a painful yet transformative experience that had ultimately shaped me into someone who valued honesty, communication, and self-respect. And while the scars would always remain, they no longer defined me. They were just reminders of the strength it took to heal, to grow, and to move forward. The confrontation had changed everything, but in the end, it had changed me for the better.